So my name is Adam Oster, and I am the community engagement librarian for the Library of Michigan. So Matt and I are kind of this two tandem wrecking ball crew. We also work with another colleague named Mindy Babarskas, who is also doing these programs as well. So tonight we're going to be spending a good chunk of time talking about how to use Ancestry Library Edition. We try to do in a few of our programs, or in most of our programs, we try to give a little bit of a breakdown about who the Library of Michigan is and what it is that we do. So I'm going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes talking about that, and then get into the content of Ancestry itself, and then do a little bit of demoing. I would recommend to people that if you're going to ask questions, either ask them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, do it at the end, because we're going to have some time left over for questions once we start wrapping things up towards the end of it. So just a little bit about the Library of Michigan itself. It's an institution created by the state of Michigan to collect, preserve, and provide access to the story of the state, and to support libraries in their role as essential community anchors. We have existed since 1828. We started during Michigan's territorial days, and the Library of Michigan has served state government and the people of Michigan, much as how the Library of Congress works at the federal level today. We have very much modeled our approach on how the Library of Congress approaches their services at the federal level. So, like I mentioned, 1828, we first started out as the Territorial Library. We were located in Detroit at the Territorial Capitol. When we became a state in 1837, that's when we transitioned to being the Territorial Library to the State Library. 1847, we moved to Lansing when the state capital transitioned from Detroit to Lansing. We still were within the Capitol building itself for several decades after that. We didn't move out of it until around the 1920s, existed in a number of buildings. And one other key sort of date to know is that we transitioned from being the state library to the Library of Michigan, had a little bit of reorganization. It was also so that we weren't always kind of being thought of as Michigan State University's library, which the name of it kind of made it a little bit harder for people to know. One was part of state government, the other was part of the university down the street in East Lansing. And then finally in 1988 is when the Michigan Library and Historical Center opens. So that building, which is the bottom picture on the right, includes us. We're on the west side of the building, and then the east side includes both the state archives and the state museum. So pretty much these three entities make up sort of your one-stop shop for anything related to Michigan history, Michigan literature, all good stuff if you're doing research into your family history and other aspects of Michigan history and culture. Okay. And this is just a photo of what the interior of the library looks like from the 4th floor down, looking into the atrium. So we're going to go over a couple of the different collections in it, but a few things to just kind of point out is that on the right is going to be where the law library is located, and on the 3rd floor, Rare and part of Maine is up on 4. A lot of the Michigan collection is down on the 2nd floor, and then on the left side is where we're going to find periodicals and federal documents and Michigan documents and a lot of different stuff like that. But so when you come into the building, this is a lot of what it's going to look like. Some key collections that are important, especially for people doing family history research. Michigan Documents collection, which includes the early joint documents that were created during the territorial and early statehood period, the annual reports of state government departments, agencies, commissions, compiled laws and rules. Then we get the Michigan collection, which is a lot of those key resources that people use for family history research: newspapers, periodicals, gazetteers and city directories, plat maps and other different types of maps, county and place histories, cemetery transcriptions, other unpublished material. We also are home to the State Law Library, so we have a significant law collection, our rare books. We've got a few pictures here that just show what the interior of the library looks like in some of those key areas. And my one little pitch that I'll put out is that we're always on the lookout for different items. So if anybody ever comes across something that might fit within our scope of what we're looking for, take a look at michigan.gov/library gift, which shows the kind of items that we're always trying to keep an eye out to include in our collection, because a lot of the things that exist out there, there's not many copies, and you can't necessarily find them on Amazon, eBay, or other different places. So that's my one pitch for that. When we're looking for family history resources, going onto our website, if you just go to michigan.gov/family history, that is the direct URL in order to find them. I should also point out that our website recently went through an update. So if you're used to what it's looked like over the last about 3 or 4 years, we just changed about a month ago. So it overall should mirror the what it looked like before in the past, as far as like the locations of where information was kept, but the look and feel is going to be a bit different. But we tried our best to try and mold the old and the new together. So if you're looking to get access to the databases that we have, especially the ones that are remotely accessible, you're going to need to get a library card from us. So anybody from the state of Michigan can get a Library of Michigan library card. If you just go to michigan.gov/library card, fill out some information, name, address, a few other key things, email address, phone number. Typically takes a few days to process. And then what we'll do is we'll send you the barcode number and PIN number for the card. You won't be getting a physical card, but if you do ever come into the library itself, we will upgrade your card to an actual physical one. And then on top of being able to access the databases, the physical one will allow you to check out books from our collection. And anything that is a copy 2 or copy 3 is available to be checked out using that card. Or once we're back in Melcat, right now we're not in Melcat because of a software upgrade going on. But once that is back up, you can also then request many of these items through Melcat to be picked up at your local library, whether you're in Adrian all the way up to Hancock, Houghton, up in the UP. So that's available up there. So I see there's a question in the chat. Do you need to renew yearly like the township libraries? Had one, but not sure if it's still current. I believe it is Matt, is it every year or every 2 years? I always forget.
It is every 2 years.
Every 2 years. So if it's been over 2 years, I would recommend that you either give us a call or send us an email, and then we'll just confirm a few things and get it back up and running for you. All right. So let's talk a little bit, transition to what is Ancestry and a bit about what it is. So Ancestry Library Edition, which is distributed by ProQuest and powered by Ancestry.com, provides billions of records in census data, vital records, directories, photos, and more from countries all over the world. Contains more than 4,000 individual databases of collections and over 2 billion names. It is accessible primarily on site at subscribing libraries. So if you're lucky to be like someplace like Commerce or a few other places in Michigan, it is potentially possible to get it remotely. I should also point out too that we're going to be talking primarily about the library edition and not necessarily about the personal subscription. So if you have questions about the personal subscription, feel free to ask them, but just be aware we might not know as much about that as the library edition, because the library edition is the one that we use on a regular basis. So, and I should also point out too that the subscription one, it usually runs between $100 to a couple $100. It's always good to keep an eye out if that is one that you're going to be getting a subscription to yourself. They always run those deals around different times of the year. Now we don't endorse any of that sort of thing, but it is good to know that like there are times that you can kind of get the better deals as opposed to just going and purchasing at any point. I see this question about Polk directories. some of them are on there, and I will be showing some examples from that in just a minute to kind of show what they look like. Let's talk a little bit about some of the popular records that are on there. So one of the key ones is the federal and state census. So the federal census has been conducted every 10 years since 1790. Right now, I have on the PowerPoint where it says it's from 1790 to 1940 that are available to the public, though I should point out that just within the last 2 weeks, the 1950 census has been released. Just be aware that it hasn't been indexed fully yet on Ancestry and some of the other databases that offer it. So that may still take anywhere from a few months to several months. So be aware that that also is available. I just didn't change it yet on the PowerPoint because we're kind of at that time where it's kind of available, but not totally available. The one that isn't for like pretty much almost all of it is gone is the 1890 census that was destroyed due to a fire in 1921. So that one, other than a few fragments of it, really isn't available. And the reason why we only have up to the 1950 out is because census records and data specific to individual respondents are not made available to the public until 72 years after a given census is taken. The reason why they do that is they want people to feel comfortable with providing accurate information, knowing that it's kept private for that 72-year period. And so then that way, everything is, that there's a greater likelihood that people will be providing accurate information when they return their info. We're primarily going to find on Ancestry the population records. Other ones that you can occasionally find are the agricultural census records, which focus on like farms and the different kind of products that they were growing and cultivating on those farms. The mortality census, which, of the times that they would do them, it was to track how many people died between the start and ending point of the census was being taken. So like the 1880 is one example of that. So start and end of 1880, they were trying to find out who died and what did they die of to put together some national statistics. Industry is focusing on like different businesses, types of products that they were producing and selling, that sort of thing. Occasionally, you can also find state censuses on Ancestry, and those were typically conducted between the years of the federal census. Michigan was doing them like in 1837, 45, 54, 64, 1874, 1884, and 1894. But it's important to note that most of them are not on Ancestry Library Edition. I know that some of them are on the Michiganology website, so if you get a chance to look at those, or look on that site, you'll want to look for them on there. But as far as on Ancestry, it can be hit and miss. And I know that there's also like an index, I think, of one of them on there, but it's just an index and not the actual images of the records themselves. Okay. So what we're going to do for an example, all the examples that I have are using past state librarians, because it's cool to kind of highlight them and their past work that they did at the state library. So our first one we're going to be looking at is Mary Frankhauser. She was state librarian from 1923 to 1933, and showing where she was listed in the federal census. So this is the 1930 federal census for Lansing. And if we zoom in right here, what we have on the left side is where it's listing the members of the household within the building that is where they're gathering statistics. These later ones, they will often have the house number and the street name. So sometimes you can even look up on Google Maps and track to see if the house is still there. And then where it lists her, it's got Mary Frankhauser right up here, listed as the head of the household. And We also have where it has their personal description, sex, race, age, and marital status, and education. So at that time, she was 49 years old and a widow. Also lists birth location and parents' birth location. And then we can see over here for occupation, it lists librarian, state library. Another kind of cool thing is these R's over here. I believe one of them, I can't remember which of the two lines it is, stands for radio. So in the 1930 census, that was one of the questions that they were asking at that time. So sometimes you can find some really interesting ones. Sometimes they'll ask where military status, so you can find little tidbits of information if somebody served in like the Civil War or the Spanish-American War, a few other ones, other different conflicts. So just for one line of information, you can gather quite a bit of tidbits of info. As far as vital records, these come in the form of birth, death, marriage, and divorce. Record contents will vary by the record, and it's always good to know it's not always going to be complete. Types of information that you're going to find on there are full name, birth and death year, birth and death location, spouse and parents' names, gender, burial location, if it's a death record, occupation. Where these records come from, it varies between states, but where things occur here in Michigan, it always starts at the county clerk's office, and then a duplicate copy is sent on to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Oftentimes what you will find is that I know MDHHS has had agreements with Ancestry in the past, and so that many of the records that you'll find on Ancestry are coming from them. So if you find something that might be a little bit odd with one of the records, then I would recommend seeing if you can find the corresponding copy of it at the clerk's office to see if everything matches up. Like, they're supposed to be 100% correct, but knowing how records occur, that's not always the case. You can also find vital record information by going through county indexes, which you can find many of those also on Ancestry as well. If you need some more information as far as like what vital records are available on Ancestry and also what's available at the Library of Michigan itself, look on the Michigan Vital Records research page that's on our website, and there's a link to that on our family history page. So we try to keep that updated to show what's on Ancestry, what's on Family Search, what's in our microfilm collection, that sort of thing. So also a good resource that's a companion to go along with anything that you're looking at on Ancestry. So this is an example of a death certificate. This is for Mary C. Spencer, who was state librarian, I believe, from 1873 or 74 until the 1920s. So looking on her list here, death certificate, it has her name and personal information. So Mary C. Spencer, she was living on 326 Sycamore. Her parents' names are listed on there. One of them was born in Virginia. The other one was born in Vermont. Cause of death, burial location. Looks like she was transferred to Ypsilanti, where she's buried at Highland Cemetery. A lot of little tidbits of information on here, cause of death. With these, if you are trying to figure out if somebody died at an institution, that will often be listed up on the top here on either the resident's name or somewhere up on the top here of where the death occurred. So if somebody was at a hospital or asylum, poorhouse, some other sort of institution, that would be listed on there. Transitioning back to Mary Frankhauser, we're going to look at the county indexes. So we're going to look at the marriage return for Mary and her husband, William. And so their marriage took place in 1900 in Hillsdale. So if we zoom in there on the bottom, and looking at the line that has her and William on it, so it lists their name and race. She was 21 years old. He was 36. They were both living in Hillsdale. looks like he was born in Ohio and she was born in Hillsdale. Lists their parents, birth locations and occupation, date and location of the marriage, and then also the witnesses and the individual who performed the marriage itself. So it looks like it was ME minister. I'm assuming that's, I think, Methodist Episcopalian, and that it took place in Hillsdale itself. So fair amount of information that you can get on here. And this is, often you'll find that these were in use starting in the 1860s up until the 1890s. And then that's where we're starting to find the transition to actual certificates instead of these county returns or county index books, as we call them. Newspapers and obituaries. It's good to point out that Ancestry does not have many full text or scanned newspapers in its collections. Now they have taken over ownership of newspapers.com. So that is sort of the arm and where they are having that content. It is important to know that Ancestry does have many index collections that provide citations for obituaries that you can use when you find the actual newspapers. So for example, some of those collections are the newspapers.com obit index that goes from the 1800s up until current, and then also the US obituary collection from 1930 to current. Now you can use those citations on there when you're either searching the microfilm collection that we have at the library, and we have a pretty extensive collection of Michigan newspapers that goes back to early statehood period up until now. And then you can also use our newspaper databases. Some of the examples that we have on here are like the newspapers.com, Newspaper Archive, Michigan Chronicle. Now we've also have in the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, Grand Rapids Press, the Ann Arbor News, and we just recently added the Saginaw newspaper as well. So there's quite a bit that you can use, especially from more larger newspapers that you can find on there. And if you can't find anything in those, Central Michigan University has another online collection that you can use as well. We have links for them that on our website. City directories. These contain an alphabetical list of citizens within a municipality. Typically we'll list the names of the heads of households and their addresses and occupational information. Sometimes a wife's name will be listed in parentheses or italics following the husband. And it may also contain a business directory, street directory, government directory, and listings of town officers, schools, societies, churches, post offices, and other miscellaneous matters of general and local interest. So that's important because if you're trying to find the length that a church existed, if your family members were attending them, or where it was located, if the church moved around, or if it stopped existing and you were trying to find what was one of the other churches from that denomination, if you can find out where it existed. So using that within the directory is certainly a helpful tool beyond just the names of the people that are listed in there. So looking at an example here to Lolita Fyan, who was one of the state librarians from, I believe it was from the 1940s until the 1960s. So she's listed here in the 1953 Polk Directory for Lansing, and it has both her and her husband, Clarence. So they were living in East Lansing at 222 Center Lawn. Looks like he was working in real estate, and it lists her as working as the state librarian at the state library. Right there. We also can find draft registration cards, both for World War I and for World War II cards. There are some other draft information pieces that you can find around there as well. I know there's some for the Civil War, and I'm sure at some point at any other things for selective service and related to other conflicts might get put on as well. But the sort of key things that you're going to find are like the order and serial numbers that are assigned by the selective service system, full name, date and place of birth, race and citizenship, occupation, personal description, and signature. So using Lolita Fine's husband, Clarence, this was the World War I draft registration card for him. So they were living in Detroit at the time. Looks like this was in 1917 that he filled it out. He was working for the engineering department of the Michigan State Telephone Company. And also lists as far as physical description, tight or tall, slender build. It's like gray eyes, light brown hair, born in Port Huron. So a fair amount of information lists what their address was, and a signature on the bottom. I have seen some examples before where people weren't the best writers, or they had not learned to read and write, and they just use an X. I've seen that a few examples, even in the World War I cards. Looking at World War II, so also taking Clarence, and you might ask yourself, why is a 53-year-old being asked to sign up for the census? Well, there was what was considered an old man's draft during the latter part of World War II, where they were getting ready just in case if they needed to call up some individuals who were more in the latter age. So living in East Lansing, which we looks like it's the same house that they were living at in 1953 from our example from the city directories, owned his own real estate business as a broker, and then has like the name and address of somebody who will always know your address, and a little bit more information about his physical description: 5'10", 165 pounds, gray eyes, hair is gray and balding, light complexion, looks like he had a scar in his kneecap. It's always interesting seeing that other obvious physical characteristics that will aid in identification. I actually asked the question one time to my grandpa's brother about my great-grandfather, because on the draft registration card, it listed that my great-grandfather had some tattoos. And I asked Uncle Albert, what tattoos did he have? And he said, how did you know that? And I said, well, I saw it on the draft card. And one was an eagle and the other was an anchor. He was in the Dutch Merchant Marines before he immigrated over to the United States. And I wouldn't have been able to ask that question if I didn't have the draft card to give me the lead to ask about it. So it's always information or interesting finding these little tidbits to help when you're having conversations with people, ancestor or living relatives. I see, did people come through Port Huron immigration-wise? There's a question that somebody asked. I found tickets on Ancestry and found that interesting. It's always important to note that people were coming through areas of Michigan for immigration, that they initially were coming to Canada and then coming across the border in places like Detroit, Port Huron, Sault Ste. Marie. So I have examples of family ancestors that were originally from in Europe, came to Canada, and then came through Buffalo before coming on to Michigan. So don't be surprised if you find that with some of these kind of records on Ancestry. I don't really go too much into immigration, but there are some stuff like that on there. What are some searching tips? Moving past the records themselves, we're going to talk a little bit about some key techniques and things to keep an eye out for when we're doing our searching. So always know that it's possible that the names of individuals and how their names are spelled can change over the course of their lives. Be cognizant of factors in play at the time the information was recorded. The language barriers, where the record recorder was not talking with the actual person, that it was a landlord, spouse, or offspring following a person's death. So that can be with like the death certificates that the person afterwards, who was sort of the key person giving information about somebody's death, didn't know everything. And that could cause some issues. So that's where you get into with these types of records that you find on Ancestry. Always try to find multiple different sources before you come to a conclusion about something. When you're looking at names and locations, try to utilize wildcards to search for names with spelling variations. So when you use a question mark, it replaces a single letter in a name. When you use an asterisk symbol, which is where you hit Shift 8 on your keyboard, that completes a word with multiple variations. So one of the examples that I like to use sometimes is one of my ancestors whose name was Macrillis Pride. His name was all over the place, and so you could sometimes just do MC with the asterisk symbol, and that would fill in the different variations of his first name when you were looking for him in the census or in other records. Like I said, with the question mark, that's going to change a single letter. So with Macrillis, sometimes it would end with an ES instead of an IS. And so you could use that for that second to the last letter to bring up the different variations of it. Something else to be cognizant of is place names. Try to be consistent with how you type those locations in the place field. With Ancestry, it's pretty good where it will auto recognize names when you're putting something in. So like when you're putting in Lansing, Ingham for Ingham County, Michigan, United States, it will recognize it. But just be aware that when you get with some of these names that maybe aren't necessarily recorded by Ancestry, a good example is like some township names that, especially for townships that became cities, Paris Township over in the Grand Rapids area eventually became Kentwood in the 1960s. And Ancestry, I don't think it has it within their database of names to know that Paris Township would be an option. It will just go automatically to either Grand Rapids or Kentwood. So try to use that autofill feature, but if it's not doing it correctly, go in that city township name, comma, county name, comma, Michigan, comma, United States when you're filling that in. That it also works for like MyHeritage and Family Search and a few of the other sort of key databases that are used for family history research. I would also recommend using the Browse the Card catalog. When you first get onto Ancestry, one of your first things that you typically do is you just go to the search box and start typing in names. Well, that's almost kind of doing the shotgun approach where you're trying to search everything all at once. Sometimes it's better to do a more targeted approach, and that's where you look in the collection catalog to try and find a specific collection that you want to search. And you can narrow those down by collection types. Collection focus can be further refined by locations and time period. And it's also good to use it because you can see when a collection has been updated. On the side here, it will tell you if it's new or if you see where like the number of records has changed after the last time that you looked at it. Well, then they may have added more content into it, and it's best to go back and check it out again if you didn't find something the first time around. So I find it really, really helpful because then you're kind of sticking to a specific record set, whether it's the census, vital records, things focused on like the military, maps, all that sort of stuff. And then there's also the refine results. So this is if you were using that initial just search box and putting content in. And then on the side, that's where you can then start refining it down by the collection, location, time period, and language. And be aware that there are things that are in foreign languages and it hasn't been translated. There are like the immigration shipping lines that were from Germany to the United States. Those weren't necessarily always translated. So hopefully you're working on your little bit of Deutsch or some of the other different languages that are on from content from other places in the world. And citation information. If you're somebody who is trying to find content in order to become part of the Daughters of the American Revolution or Sons of Union Civil War Veterans or some other sort of group where you're trying to show lineage, always get your citation information at the bottom of the record. So, and what it will do is it'll give the source information, and then we'll also give the information of where that content was originally from. So, like with the World War draft registration cards, the example that we have here, there's the source information of where you found it on Ancestry, but then it's also showing where it originally came from the National Archives, and that it came from the Family History Library microfilm of that content from the National Archives. And you can also find on there where I'll have a description about the records as well to give you a better idea of context about it, length of time in which they were being collected, what types of information. Another good source if you're needing help for citations. So Family Search on their wiki has a Cite Your Sources section. So familysearch.org/wiki. In fact, if you just go into Family Search and look under the wiki and put in Cite Your Sources, it's going to come right up. And that's a good tool for just kind of getting everything in a bit of a formula that a lot of people, that's more consistent when you're having to submit this information. I also recommend, just as a general practice for any family history research, but definitely with Ancestry, and create what's called a document chronology. So that's where you take all the documents and record that you have for a specific person and make a list of them in chronological order. As you're putting them in, also add in like the year, the location, like state, county, and city, the address of the person, the occupation, the document source. And we're going to look at an example here from State Librarian Lolita Fyan. So looking at the information of just content that I was able to find on Ancestry and a few other sources, knowing that she was born in 1894 in Clinton County, Iowa, which came from the Iowa U.S. Delayed Birth Records, being in the census, both the federal and the Iowa State Census, and several different ones. Marriage records, she was living in Detroit at the time she got married. And then once we get into the 1930s and 40s, finding her in the federal census, the city directories, and then lastly, her obituary where she died March 17, 1990 at Bircham Hills Retirement Center in East Lansing. So, and if you have this in like an Excel document, then you can start adding pieces into it, and you just add rows and periodically print them off. It's good to have that as also like a table of contents for your records if you have the printed ones off. So does anybody have any questions so far before I get into the actual database demonstration? You can either put them in the chat or if you do want to unmute yourself at this time, you can ask and I can go back to different slides. But like I said, I will be doing a demonstration just to show everybody where to get onto different things within Ancestry. So I'll just pause for just a second. So if anybody has any questions. Matt, did I miss any in the chat at all?
No, the few that came up in the chat, I think I did answer them in chat. The only thing that I would remind you is once you're in the database demonstration, if you could show the attendees how to locate any of the city directories.
Yes, we'll do that. Okay. Well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my PowerPoint and bring up website here a second. Just go to our homepage. This out of the way. So this is the Library of Michigan's new website. If you were going to our website, if you were physically at our building, to get to either our family history materials, it's under For the Public and then Family History. Get a library card is right there, and that's how you get to the application to request a library card. And then there's also a spot here where it says online resources for library card holders. That's where our complete set of databases are, because there's some other non-family history stuff that's that we also have available for card holders. And just to show everybody what that is, I'm going to go on there. So the newspaper and family history ones are on the top. And then we also have some other ones: eBook Central, ProQuest Education Database, Public Health, and then a few ones that we have that are that don't require a library card but are good to know about. Those are right there, everything from Getting to Mel, LM Digital, all the way down to Read Michigan. I see there's a question: will this recording be available online? Yes, it will be. We will have it available right away on our Facebook page. Well, might take, I don't know, about an hour for it to process and get totally on there. And then we will eventually have it on our the YouTube channel that we share with the rest of the Department of Michigan Education. And that will take roughly about a week because it has to be captioned first before it gets on there. So, and just to go to, for the public, family history. And so that vital records research link that I mentioned earlier is right there. Ancestry. Now, what it should do for me, because I'm logged onto my VPN, it goes directly to it. So this is the main homepage. It used to be that you would have like the search box right here, but now they don't have that. You have to hit begin searching to get to it. A couple things to just point out on the top. Search. If you click on that, is where you can either search all categories or break it down to specific types of records, or you can go to that card catalog, and I'll show that in a little bit. The Learning Center, that's if you want to look at other video tutorials that Ancestry has that go a little bit further in depth beyond what we're talking about today. Charts and forms, that's really cool that it has PDFs of different forms that you can download, print, use to help with your research if you're doing either on-site research or using digital databases. And new collections is where it's highlighting what recent ones that they've added in, either that have been updated from previous versions or new content that they just added in. Good thing to know, it says on here that we are logged in as the Library of Michigan, not logged in using a personal subscription. So if it was a personal subscription, it would show your name right there. There isn't a way to directly transfer things from the library edition to the personal subscription. So if you do find something and you have a tree that's on a personal version of Ancestry, you got to download it first to your computer or whatever device you're using, and then re-upload it to the personal one. So a few other things down here, other different quick links. Even though we're using the library edition, we can view public member trees that people with a personal subscription have. You can't like add content, but you can at least view them. If you want a direct way to get to those city directories, there is a link to them right here. But let me first just go to begin searching. And then what this does is it brings up the search box where we can just put in the name of the person. We can also explore by different collections right here, broken down by birth, marriage, and death, census, immigration, military, schools, and directories. So the city and area directories are right there. Tax, criminal, land, wills, other different reference material. You can also see what's available just for a particular state. So Michigan, we've got right here. You can also click on the location. Looks like for Michigan, there's 357 individual collections. But let's just put in a name. So if I put in Lolita Ryan, and she was born in 1894. See, there's a question about personal trees. So the personal a personal subscription to Ancestry lets people put information onto a family tree on Ancestry, and that is viewable to anybody who has both a personal subscription and a library edition. So you can view that on there, but on them. But you can't take something from the library edition of Ancestry, like a image of the census record or a citation or a death certificate, and directly put it onto your tree that's through the personal version of Ancestry. You have to download the image file to your computer and then re-upload it to the tree that you have through the personal subscription. So it's sort of a wonky thing. There just is no direct connection between the two different versions of the databases, and that's just because you're logging in with an institutional login and not a personal version of it. So, but it is nice that you can at least see what people have if they've uploaded something onto their personal one. So what we have for Lolita Fyan, we have the newspaper obituary index. So clicking on that, what this does is it gives a basic breakdown of the details of the obituary date and the newspaper that it was in. What's kind of cool is if you hit source, it then will give you the direct URL for what it is on that database. Now, I myself have a personal subscription to newspapers.com. So what I could do is I could just copy this, go to a new tab, and then open it and view it. But if you don't have that, the key details that you're going to want is this information: Lansing State Journal, the obituary date. It doesn't give the page number, but you would at least be able to find the newspaper, whether it's through another online database or on microfilm at the Library of Michigan or another library that has it. So there's that right there. There's also a cool feature where the suggested records come up when you bring up an individual record itself. So we have on here where it has a link to her marriage record to Clarence, or where she was listed in the 1920 census, the death index, 1930 census. These will not always be completely accurate. It's where Ancestry is taking information that you would put in for your search and the information for this particular record, and it's trying to extrapolate out some suggested records. So don't be surprised if that comes up. And let's scroll down here. If we want to filter, this is where we could filter down to like directories and the census. If you hover over the name of something, it will give you a preview of what it is. The 1930 census here has it right there, and the names of the people. And another kind of cool thing that I would recommend doing is that when you're looking at select the census, go ahead, go down to the household members and click on the other person's name. So if it's a husband and wife, click on the husband, because the suggested records will be slightly different. And you may find something that you're looking for that wasn't showing when you were looking at the other household member. That maybe it's a primary record that's focused more on, in this case, Clarence, the husband, but yet there's still references to Lolita on it if you're researching more on her. But either way, it's just a good thing to do, because when you are clicked on one, it's focusing on that person and not both people when you're looking at the suggested records. Okay, so finding her, we've got one here for the city directories. And so it has the detailed information right here, the name of the publication. Click on source, that's where that source information is right there. If we're looking at the image itself, if we click on it, what this then does is we can then zoom in and out right here. And if we were looking for them, they are, let's see, fine, right down here, right here on the bottom. And a couple other features that we have. So like if we're going to save it, if we go up to save, this is where it says save to this computer. So that's where I would be saving it onto my computer itself. Send image home. When you're using the library edition, I don't always recommend doing that because what it's doing is I believe it's sending the citation and not, let's click on it a second. So you put in your email address and then it sends a link to it home to your email address. But keep in mind, because if you're at home when you're trying to access it, it won't let you do it because you need to be on at the library to be able to access the database. So I would kind of avoid using that unless you're one of those lucky few libraries like Commerce that do let you have remote access. Other few features here, where if you hit the little icon that brings out more information, that's where you get the source information. You can also bring up the related text or related records, other more details. If you hit the wrench sign, this is where you can also hit download, rotate it. And sometimes it's kind of cool to hit the invert colors because if you're having a hard time reading something, it changes the white background from in black text to a black background with white text. And that may make it a bit easier, especially if you're looking at handwriting, to try and decipher what's being said. Inverting the colors can be a good tool. So just going back here to the search. So say if we were going to be looking at like those directories going, so we could go here and hit school directories and church histories. We can narrow it down by city or area directories, US city directories. And then you can either search by name, or what I have a tendency to do is I hit browse this collection, and that's where I can go to a particular city or county. So if I was going to be looking at like Coldwater, and it will give me the years of what they have on there. So 1874 up to 1956. That's only the ones that they have digitized. There may be more that are out there. And you'll also find with some of the ones that are like from Detroit that not everything, like not the complete scan is on there. Maybe only portions of it. I don't know exactly why, but just keep in mind that you may find a little bit of a barrier with that. And then that's when you have to see if we have a copy of it at the Library of Michigan, or if Detroit Public Library, a few other places have it. So going back to search, I'm going to click on the card catalog just to show that. And this is where you can filter by those locations, look to see what ones are new because it defaults as the date added. So if we were going to look at like military, and one of the ones that I like to look at on a regular basis, if we go to record count, that's where the draft registration cards are. The U.S. Army transport arriving and departing passenger list is pretty cool, especially if you're doing World War I research. Great tool like that. So like the Learning Center, that's where you get those tutorials, research aids, charts and maps. This is where you can download the everything from the ancestral charts, research calendars. They also have census forms on there, so if you're having a hard time reading what the different labels are on them, you can download them here. It looks like they also go into like the UK Census and Canadian Census records. So there is some message boards on here. I don't know how much of that is actually used anymore. That's kind of a throwback to an older way of communicating now that we're using things like Facebook and a few other different social media tools. It's not used as much, but sometimes if you're trying to find something and you can't find it, maybe look to see if there's any ones that are based on like places that you're doing research. Like if you wanted to go into Michigan, different counties, different stuff like that. It looks like it hasn't really been accessed too much, but sometimes you can get lucky. I'll go back to the home page here. And yeah, just using some of those quick links right there. And let's see. I believe that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions? You can either put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to do so.
Excuse me.
Yes.
The Ancestry.com library edition, you get that through the county library or the state library? Because I just got a state library card, but I got a Monroe County card.
So I believe,
Also.
I think Monroe County probably has a subscription to it. In fact,
Okay.
let's double check. That's a good question. So Monroe Library System, Michigan.
But you actually have to be at the library, right?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So let's look
Okay.
at genealogy. Let's see here. Databases. So they have, it says Ancestry Plus. Let's see what happens when we click on that. Yeah, it's giving the thing that normally comes up where it says you have to, you're basically where you have to be at the building in order to use it. So yeah,
Okay.
Monroe County, same with us. You're going to have to physically be at the library location in order to use it. But with
Okay.
Monroe County, because they have so many different locations, it doesn't matter which
Right.
one, as long as you're on site at one of them.
Okay.
But yeah, good question.
And you can use your own computer as long as you're there using their Wi-Fi. Is that what it is?
Yes, that is correct. And I've never had that like an issue with that at any other one. So as long as you're on their public Wi-Fi, something we used to always say. I used to work at Kent District Library, and the Wi-Fi stayed on longer after the library closed. I think it stayed on until like 11 p.m. at night, and it extended out like, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet away from the building, so you could be in your car on your laptop accessing the Wi-Fi to get to the content. So if you're a diehard researcher, it's something you could always do.
Well, that's we're rural, so the library isn't open a lot of
Yep.
hours that I'm available. And they did, even during the pandemic, it was on all the time, and you could go into their parking lot and do stuff. So thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. I see there's a question about further discussion about library cards for out-of-staters, especially if Michigan is our home state. And I see Matt has just put on there hasn't been any further discussion. I know a lot of that has to do with the agreements that we have with our database providers, that if we start allowing access for non-state residents, it may start driving the cost up. So maybe there might be more discussion at some point, but like Matt said in the chat, it really hasn't been talked more about, because yeah, it gets a little bit more complicated when it comes around like negotiating time for the subscriptions. So other questions?
So Adam, I see one from Tara. It's kind of more of a general question she has on that she's stuck on two people in the fifth and sixth generation.
Okay.
Any suggestions?
Where are they from, Tara? Do you know roughly where in Michigan or outside of Michigan?
I think it's getting into like Ireland and Canada and all that kind of stuff. I work at a library, so I can use the Ancestry. I've done like 3 or 4 other sites like Family Search and everything, and I'm just like, and I go back every 6 months and see if I can find anything new, and I'm just like so stuck. And if I could fill in 2 people, I would have like 6 generations done to share with my family. And I'm frustrated. So I just don't know.
Have you looked to see what resources are available from the home countries of where those ancestors were at? Through, I know like Family Search has its wiki, and you could kind of see what's available either locally or at the national level of those countries. And sometimes they have materials
I'm sorry. I have a little bit, but I'm not good at it. And it's just like this person fell off the face of the earth. I'm just like, so I've gotten pretty far, so I'm excited. But
okay,
if I could get like 2 more people, it would be like complete.
I don't know, Matt, can you think of anything else?
No, from what what you said before on those home country libraries, but
I keep going back and I learn more and I keep practicing. So I mean, I'm not going to give up, but I just didn't know if you kind of get on there and you go down a rabbit hole and then you go off in 10 different directions. And then you got to stop and refocus and go back. So
I would say start familiarizing yourself with, like, so if it was Great Britain, it would be the British Museum, or I'm trying to think of other examples, kind of like what the Library of Congress is for the United States. Try to see if there is a companion kind of institution in those other countries. And then also seeing if you know that, like, the nationality of them. Oftentimes, like the Family Search Research Wiki will have specific types of wiki entries that are on certain ethnicities and certain groups, and you can kind of get an idea of what kind of records they were creating at the time that they were alive. So when it comes to the types of things that go on to, like, our county clerks and our all those other paper trail things that we do here in the United States, if you can start learning what they were doing overseas, in those places, that might help. If they were part of a church, I mean, I've got all these Dutch ancestors, and they were all the Reformed Church.
Another comment I had is you talked about how the name changes, the spellings change. I took another genealogy research seminar, and he said the ages changed because it depended on how old you had to be to get on the boat for free. So if everybody under 5 got on free, the 5-year-old became 4 and the 4-year-old became 3, and then all the dates changed. So that was interesting and good information to have.
Or if one of those kids was running away and they wanted to join the military, the 15-year-old
all
of a sudden became 18 years old.
Yep. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Any other questions? Thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop back up our contact info. So if you do have any questions in the future, this is our address, phone number, and email address, so librarian@michigan.gov. We have a few of us who will answer those email addresses, and we try to distribute them out amongst the staff. So I answer them, Matt does. So if you do have questions specifically for us about this presentation, just send them directly to there, and then we'll respond to it on that. Key things about on our website, the main library website, michigan.gov/library of Michigan, michigan.gov/library card, michigan.gov/family history. I know Matt briefly mentioned, and I'm just going to recap, the next in-person program is going to be Michigan Military Resources at the Library of Michigan. That is on May 5. I believe that is a Thursday, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Yep. Lake Michigan or Lake Erie room in the Library of Michigan. No registration is required. Mr. Pacer is going to be one leading that. And then the next virtual one, and that will also be featuring Matt Pacer, is Full 3 Library Edition. That will be a virtual one, June 2, Thursday, 6:30, just like what we're doing tonight. That one you do have to register for, so if you haven't done it yet, go to michigan.gov/LM public programs, and that's where the link to register on Zoom to do it. So anything else for the good of the order? Okay. If not, then I think we're going to go ahead and end this. And like I said, we will have the recording should be showing up on our Facebook page sometime in the next hour or two. And then we will have the link to it on YouTube available sometime in the next week or so. And there will be a link to it on the same page where you registered on the michigan.gov/LM public programs page. So otherwise, like I said, just shoot us an email or give us a call. And thanks for joining us tonight.